On this edition of the Correspondents, new South Korean President Moon Jae-in takes his first trip to Washington amid growing concerns about the North. Republican efforts to repeal and replace Obamacare are put on life support, at least for the moment. And outbursts in the White House press room. What's going on between the media and the Trump administration? Hello, I'm Millar Seaga, and this is the Correspondents on Voice of America. Well, South Korea's new president, Moon Jae-in, meets with President Trump at the White House for the first time this week amid growing tensions about their neighbor to the north. Just one of the many serious issues that are bound to come up. VOA's Bill Gallo takes a look at what we can expect when the two leaders meet in Washington.
The first meeting between Donald Trump and Moon Jae-in has plenty of potential areas of friction. During the campaign, Trump regularly accused Seoul of ripping off the U.S. on trade and threatened to withdraw U.S. troops from South Korea. At one point, Trump suggested he'd have North Korean leader Kim Jong-un assassinated, a threat he since walked back. More recently, Trump has said he'd be willing to meet Kim face-to-face, under the right circumstances. Still, his approach to the North stands in stark contrast to that of Moon, a liberal human rights lawyer who advocates engagement with Pyongyang. But the two leaders' strategies aren't as contradictory as they may seem, according to Gary Seymour, an Obama White House official speaking via Skype.
Well, Trump has said many different things about North Korea, but I think the overall strategy is one of pressure to create conditions for engagement. And that's something that President Moon has actually endorsed.
Disagreements could also arise over the deployment of the THAAD U.S. anti-ballistic missile system in South Korea.
And joining us now to discuss the South Korean president's first visit to the White House, I'm joined here in Washington by VOA Central News reporter William Gallo, who filed that story for us, along with our South Korea expert, G. Abby Lee, with VOA's English service. I thank you both for joining us. So, Bill Gallo, thank you for that report. So, these two leaders are meeting as we go to air Friday morning. Obviously, North Korea very high on the agenda. Are you seeing any areas of differences or agreement when these two meet?
Well, they do have areas of disagreement, but I think the areas of disagreement are mainly over tactics rather than strategy. I mean, both leaders obviously want to resume talks. They want to implement some sort of freeze on North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. But I think the question mainly is when to start those talks. President Moon seems to want to start them very quickly, actually, and make more concessions right away. Whereas Trump, I don't think, is as committed to starting this right away. He sort of wants to maximize pressure on Kim Jong-un before those talks begin.
So you're suggesting the issue is how they approach this issue,
right? And
strategically.
It's very different. I mean, Moon is, as I mentioned in the TV piece, a liberal human rights lawyer. He doesn't speak with such, I don't know how you can say it, he's not as acerbic whenever he talks about this issue. Trump, meanwhile, really has been all over the place on this issue, especially during the campaign whenever he felt a little more free to talk. As I mentioned, he suggested that he would have China assassinate Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, really.
Of course, he's walked that back. He's now said that he would be willing to have talks with them under the right conditions. Of course, the relations with the North have even, deteriorated worse, so that doesn't look likely. But it's a massive difference as far as how they talk about North Korea, I would say.
And G, as Bill mentioned, there's a big difference here between Moon Jae-in and his predecessor, longtime conservative. We're talking about a progressive leader for the South Korean country. How does he differ in terms of previous administrations?
Just like Bill said, very different because I guess if Park Geun-hye was still in power, she would have more in common on North Korea approach with President Trump. But because Moon Jae-in is very different from his predecessor, and he actually protested against Park Geun-hye's father, former President Park Chung-hee, so he has a more lenient strategy toward North Korea.
I see. So both leaders met Thursday night for a formal dinner along with their spouses. How did that dinner meeting go? Do you see any chemistry there between these two leaders? Are they able to work together?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating to note that South Korean media focus a lot on the 4-second handshake So they're doing all these little graphics and the countdowns of the handshakes between Trump and Abe, Trump and Xi Jinping, and Trump and the President Moon. And they say, yeah, 4 seconds, it wasn't aggressive, it was very cordial, and they seem to like it a lot.
Bill, a lot of times it's those superficial details that the media pays attention to before we even talk about some of the hard issues that need to be addressed, correct?
Right. I mean, it's funny to actually see how often handshakes and things like this are discussed.
Because Donald Trump made it a thing.
It's definitely a thing. I mean, this is not something that only the media are focusing on. Whenever Trump met the French leader recently, there was an awkward handshake, and then the French President Macron actually then discussed this. Yes, this is something I did intentionally because I want to let him know I'm not going to give it.
But I think the leaders have caught on, right? I mean, Justin Trudeau has his own way of sort of avoiding that kind of a... Right?
It seems shallow, but there's a little more substance there than you might think.
Right, but it says a lot about these leaders. But gee, I mean, getting back into some serious matters, this meeting between these two leaders is bound to be somewhat tricky because any kind of agreement they reach is going to include, in some fashion, China. Correct?
Yeah, that's right. And South Korea being a very dependent on international trade, and they're going to talk about...
And China is their largest trading partner, correct?
That's correct. And U.S. is South Korea's strongest ally. So that puts kind of Korea in a very difficult position because they have to renegotiate, it seems like, with the U.S. about the KORUS FTA, the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. So it'll be interesting how that plays out between U.S. and South Korea when it comes to Korea's relationship with China as well.
And when it comes to the THAAD system, the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System that the United States is introducing to South Korea, how does China factor into whatever decision the South Korean president makes on that?
Well, they've put an enormous amount of pressure on South Korea to actually, halt the deployment of this anti-ballistic missile system. And I think the view here in Washington, a lot of people think that South Korea sort of gave in to that pressure. I don't know if that's the case, but that's how a lot of Trump officials view it.
Does South Korea have a choice? I mean, the United States is also a big trading partner and a big defense partner. Right?
Well, the thing is, it was already agreed that the South Korea will provide real estate and the U.S. will deploy the defense system in South Korea.
That's already an agreement in place, and that's not bound to change at all, right?
Well, except that Mr. Trump has said that South Korea should pay for some of the defense costs. So President Moon has to decide whether he wants to kind of take into the consideration that it's a new administration and he wants to make sure that the countries that U.S. provides defense support to will, pay part of the cost. So we'll see how that goes. But the thing is, if you don't provide your allies with the responsibilities that come with being the global leader, I think it's inevitable that your leadership also in the global stage kind of diminishes significantly.
Bill, but also as you mentioned in your piece, Donald Trump was very harsh on South Korea's leaders, particularly on trade issues, particularly on the issue of North Korea. Do you think he's moderated his tone, or is he going to be forced to moderate his tone after this face-to-face?
He definitely has moderated his tone since becoming president. There's no doubt about it on South Korea. What this will look like as far as his meeting with Moon, I don't think anyone knows. White House officials were sort of ahead of this meeting playing the positive aspects of it up, saying there would be more unified messages coming out of this. But he used language to describe the relationship with South Korea in a way that really hasn't been done before, at least not recently, by U.S. presidents. So will those issues come up? I don't know.
Well, thank you both for covering this issue so closely for us. I do appreciate your help. Thank you so much, Abby Lee and Bill Gallo. We're going to take a short break now. But when we come back, Obamacare lives to fight another day. This is The Correspondents on Voice of America.
This is BizBeat.
The textile industry represents most of Pakistan's total exports, but exports have declined by some 20% under the current leadership. In Karachi, mills spin yarn in a process requiring dye and cotton to make fabric, a process workers believe should expand into a broader range of products.
In this era, we can do anything we want to because of the technology.
Young entrepreneurs like Amjad Ibrahim, the CEO of Orient Textile Mill, says technology with government help could boost the country's export capabilities.
We have the human resource. I think our country have a lot of potential. We can do a lot of better things in future.
Competitors have weaved into the mix too, especially less developed countries who enjoy better trade incentives. Still, Ibrahim believes small improvements can put Pakistan back on top of the textile industry. For VOA's BizBeat, I'm Philip Alexio.
VOA, telling America's story for more than 70 years.
The voice speaking from America and the war.
VOA exports America's most powerful product, freedom of speech.
Close the waters.
In parts of the world, information is scarce and oppression real. VOA, sharing a voice that says, we report the truth.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Millar Seaga in Washington. Well, after taking a stumble earlier this week, Senate Republicans say they're not quite finished yet. They've vowed to renew their efforts to repeal Obamacare and pass a new bill to dramatically overhaul the American healthcare system. A key pledge they made along with then candidate Donald Trump in last year's presidential election. With more on that, here's VOA's Jim Malone.
The political stakes for President Trump on health care are huge as he tries to follow and replace Obamacare.
We are looking at a health care that would be a fantastic tribute to our country, a health care that will take care of people finally for the right reasons and also at the right cost.
But the Republican effort in the Senate stalled amid protests at the Capitol and divisions among Republican senators over a bill that could result in millions of Americans losing their health insurance coverage.
Continue to move back in that direction.
Democrats remain firmly opposed, including Senator Chuck Schumer.
The American people are not for big tax breaks to the wealthiest of Americans, nor are they for dramatically cutting their health care. That's why the bill has about 17% popularity in America, and even Trump voters don't like it.
We have really no choice but to solve this situation.
Trump and Republicans like Senator John Barrasso insist Obamacare is failing and it's time for Congress to act.
So Obamacare is a bust. It's going off a cliff. The Democrats are saying stay on board. We're trying to rescue the American people from this bust that they're on.
Failure on health care could also hurt the president, says Andra Gillespie.
We want to see whether or not voters feel that President Trump has lived up to his hype and expectations and whether or not he's been able to keep his promises.
So we're going to talk and we're going to see what we can do.
As much as Trump wants a victory on health care, his own weak poll ratings could limit how much leverage he has in trying to win over wary Republicans. Jim Malone, VOA News, Washington.
And joining us now for what the Republican postponement of the replacement health care bill means politically for both parties, we're joined here in Washington by VOA congressional correspondent Katherine Gibson. Katherine, I thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Who knew health care could be so complicated?
I know, right? Just, get it done. Get it done just before the July 4th recess.
How did this happen? How did it not come to a vote? I mean, it seemed to me early on that with all his secrecy that Mitch McConnell was definitely going to ram this through.
He is the master legislator. He is known for that up on Capitol Hill, but I think this was a tall order even for Mitch McConnell.
So clearly he could not generate enough votes to support this bill.
Right. Well, he has a very narrow margin, remember. He has to get those 52 votes to get that through. But he just couldn't do it. He had a handful of Republican senators who just said that the CBO score, the Congressional Budget Office score, talking about the number of Americans who would lose their health insurance coverage was just too much to take. And you have to remember that usually these bills take a much longer time to get through Capitol Hill. You have hearings, you have markups, you have people meeting, you have coalitions forming. This is not something that was going to happen in the 4 days before their July 4th recess.
So Republican senators obviously were worried about the CBO score, which suggested that as many as 22 million Americans would lose
that's
health care.
Right.
The president also tweeting earlier on that this bill was mean. How much of a factor was that in Republicans saying, hold on a minute?
Well, you know, the president was speaking about the House version of the bill, the AHCA. The Senate is looking at something called Better Care, which is slightly different. And it's interesting the way President Trump has approached the health care debate on Capitol Hill. He's really kind of ceded it to Senate Republicans. He said, this is yours. And then he tends to dip in and out with his tweets and with these meetings, saying that the bill is mean, that he wants better coverage, the best coverage ever. And then he steps away from it. So they have to be concerned about what the White House is saying, but he's not really getting into the policy weeds on this.
Despite his intensity on this issue during the campaign trail, he seems to have taken this laissez-faire attitude all of a sudden on health care. But I guess my question to you now is, what happens next? Do the Republicans give up on this? Do they allow Obamacare to just implode? What happens?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
No?
So after Mitch McConnell announced that the vote would not be happening this week before the July 4th recess, he said that they were going to go back to the drawing board. They're having meetings Friday, even into today, as they meet and talk about how they move forward. We know that President Trump tweeted Friday morning saying that if Senate Republicans can't get their act together on this, then they should just repeal Obamacare and worry about a replacement another time.
But by doing that, you place a lot of Americans at risk for not having health care.
That's right. That's not really practical.
That's kind of a dereliction of duty when it comes to our lawmakers, right? I mean, they need to do something. Is there a timing issue here?
There is a timing issue. There was a sense on Capitol Hill this week that this needed to get done. You know, Republicans wanted to have this bill signed on the president's desk by this April. Obviously, that didn't happen with all of the drama that we had over on the House side for the health care bill. Now they just want to get this through before they have the next big things on their agenda. Tax reform, the 2018 budget. Those are going to suck up a lot of time and air on Capitol Hill, and they need to get this health care issue over with. So you're
saying having a successful health care bill or having a health care bill passed is going to be crucial for the rest of the president's agenda?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of his key campaign promises, even if he isn't in on the weeds on it. He still wants to see this done as a victory, his first major legislative victory. So to get that under his belt and then move on to some of these other big ticket issues, it's really important.
You know, Katherine, we're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have health care as a right. Of its citizens. Why is health care such a difficult proposition in this country?
You know, Mill, part of it is the way that our healthcare system evolved in this country. We had this strange patchwork system after World War II. Some of it are concerns from many Americans who worried about having a socialized healthcare system. They don't believe that the government should get involved in their healthcare. And then it's also a matter of politics. You know, this healthcare debate on Capitol Hill goes back to Hillary Clinton when she was First Lady trying to get healthcare legislation through. She had difficulty with it, then the Democrats had difficulty with Obamacare. Now the Republicans are in the hot seat.
And given the president's promises on this issue and 7 years of nagging about repealing and replacing Obamacare, I guess this is quite a crucial must-do issue for Republicans if they're ever to get anything out of the midterm elections.
Absolutely.
Right?
No, they have to go back to their constituents for midterm elections and just this week as they go back for their holiday recess and explain to them what this bill means. We're talking about a sixth of the American economy. You're talking about people, their life and death. Their money is sunk into their own health care. So really getting into the policy weeds on this means life or death for a lot of people, and that's really hard when you talk to your constituents.
I'm so glad, Katherine, that you're covering this for us.
It's a fun story.
Thank you very much, Katherine Gibson. It's time for us to take another break, but when we come back, what's happened to civility in the White House? And when did reporters become the enemy? More on that when we come back, but first, a reminder, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. We'll be right back.
This is Living Better.
These U.S. war veterans are learning golf as part of a program called PGA Hope. Many have never played, but they're using the game to reduce symptoms of PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, among the most common effects of war. Vietnam War veteran Sylvan Oliveri.
It puts you in a different place. It makes you concentrate like you concentrate on the ball. So you're not thinking about anything else but that ball. So that period of time is PTSD free.
Golf is a demanding mental game, and that's a reason it can help veterans suffering from unseen pain, says golf instructor Andy Crane.
Learning about PTSD, there's a lot of things that go on in between the ears that we don't get to see. You know, when we have amputees or something like that, we know what the injury is, but we can't really see what people are thinking.
In the United States, up to 20% of veterans of the Iraq War suffer from symptoms of PTSD each year. I'm Martin Seacrest for VOA's Living Better.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Millar Seaga in Washington. Well, from the first days of his campaign to his frequent tweets about fake news, it's pretty clear Donald Trump is no fan of reporters and news organizations they work for. While it's probably true that no modern president actually enjoys sparring with the media, Mr. Trump has taken his dislike of the press to a whole new level, even calling out the media as the enemy of the American people. But this week, it seems some members of the press corps had finally had enough. Have a listen to this exchange.
You mentioned the Scaramucci story where they had to have reporters resign.
Come on, you're inflaming everybody right here and right now with those words. This administration has done that as well. Why in the name of heavens? Any one of us, right, are replaceable, and any one of us, if we don't get it right, the audience has the opportunity to turn the channel or not read us. You have been elected to serve for 4 years at least. There's no option other than that. We're here to ask you questions. We're here to provide the answers. And what you just did is inflammatory to people all over the country who look at it and say, see, once again, the president is right and everybody else out here is fake media. And everybody in this room is only trying to do their job.
Well, I disagree completely. First of all, I think if anything has been inflamed, it's the dishonesty that often takes place by the news media. And I think it is outrageous for you to accuse me of inflaming a story when I was simply trying to respond to his question.
And obviously that was Brian Karem with the Sentinel in that exchange with White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders. So who's right? Is the press guilty of dishonesty and grandstanding, or is the White House trying to suppress the freedom of the press? To help us out with that, we're joined here in Washington once again by VOA's William Gallo and by former White House correspondent, now senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Saine. I thank you both for joining us. This is a very interesting topic. So what, is this now the way it is at the White House? Confrontational? Is that what we can expect to see more of, Bill?
It sure seems like it. I mean, this, as you mentioned in your intro, is a level of war with the media that we haven't seen before. I mean, this is unprecedented. I mean, not only does Donald Trump go after the media in general, he goes after specific news outlets, and he goes after specific reporters, as I'm sure we'll talk about.
And a lot of it has to do with the president's constant tweeting, which he got into trouble with again this week, this time with a nasty tweet against MSNBC co-host Mika Brzezinski, right? What did he say that inflamed the public so much?
Well, that's right, Mill. He called her low IQ, and then he said that she and her co-host had visited him at Mar-a-Lago, and she'd been bleeding from a facelift. So it was insulting her intellect and also insulting her appearance, which we've kind of seen a pattern of, well, candidate Trump insulting women, you know, saying that another woman, another host was bleeding from wherever. And it strikes me as, like I said, a very disturbing pattern of especially vicious attacks against women.
In particular, misogynistic, sexist? What do you make of it, Bill?
Well, it's received bipartisan criticism, and many people on both sides of the aisle have.
Republicans are?
Yes, Republicans and Democrats have both criticized those tweets. I'll leave it to them to decide what it is, but it's important to know that this is nothing new. I mean, Donald Trump has done this for a long time. In fact, there are decades of records, whether that's in books like Donald Trump's Art of the Deal,
right,
or whether interviews or tweets, of him suggesting that whenever someone criticizes, he will hit back, and he'll hit back hard.
I guess that's nothing new from a reality television star, but we're talking about the office of the presidency here. I mean, we're not talking about any other person just responding fire with fire. We're talking about the highest office in the land, basically gutter fighting.
Yes, and as Bill said, there has been bipartisan condemnation, with particularly a number of women senators saying, just stop it. Just stop the tweets. This is beneath the dignity of the office. Mm-hmm. And some are saying it would be a good idea maybe if some of the women senators and members of Congress would meet with President Trump and discuss with him and talk about the role model function that he does have, and say that, you know, this is upsetting to their daughters. It's not a good role model for their sons. Perhaps have to try to have some influence influence on them.
That's an interesting idea, and I'd be curious to see if that actually works. But Bill, I guess my question to you is, when did the press all of a sudden become the enemy of the people?
Well, as you mentioned before, this is nothing new that the media has fought with the president, but when have they become the enemy of the people? That's a relatively new development. Donald Trump has shown a willingness to go after media that no one else has shown. I don't know how this is going to get any better, honestly.
It almost feels like you have to duck for cover every time Sean Spicer or Sarah Huckabee speaks. Right. Speaking of which, Cindy, you were a White House correspondent for the latter part of the Obama administration. What was it like? I mean, I'm looking at a comparison here. What was it like sitting there at a press briefing under Josh Earnest?
It was very tame, if not to say maybe a little boring in comparison. They went on very long, often an hour and a half or 2 hours, and you would catch yourself yawning from time to time. And there were, of course, some disagreements, and some people challenged him, especially on his Syria policy. Not everybody was happy with it, but it was a much more. There weren't the sense of
not the slugfest.
Yeah, exactly. The sense of hostility and open warfare that you're getting now.
And Bill Gallo, you've sat in under a few of Sean Spicer's press briefings. What's that like?
It's must-see TV. That's what it is. I mean, it's completely a different thing from what the Obama...
Is that part of the problem, maybe? Is it that have reporters made these daily press briefings must-see TV?
Well, that is the public explanation given by White House officials as to why they have held fewer on-camera briefings and fewer briefings in general. They say that too many reporters are using this to sort of become famous, to sort of, up their profile a little bit, create YouTube moments. I think there's something to be said for that. This is television, after all. They've also used as an excuse that they want Donald Trump's voice to dominate the headlines, and I think there's a bit of truth in that as well.
But it's also, I mean, it seems to me, more of a White House spin room now. I mean, it's always deny, 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 and defend, defend, defend the president, even when clearly the public knows that he is wrong or he's lied on certain facts. What do you make of these? Is this censorship, what's going on right now? Because we are seeing the daily press briefings minimized, sometimes with delayed, not live, and sometimes only audio. That's never happened before.
Right. Well, actually, it was under Bill Clinton that they were first televised, the White House briefings. Mm-hmm. And I think Bill is right to some degree that there is, some grandstanding done by especially the big network reporters. But I think what to me is more serious is when you have the White House press secretaries and the president saying fake news. This is all fake news. And I think that is an attack really on the fourth estate, as we call it here in the United States, which serves a vital function in our democracy. And it's also an attack on the truth itself. And it started in Sean Spicer's very first White House press briefing about the crowd size.
We all know that.
And there were photos. And he came out on attack that very first briefing. And ever since then, it's been kind of a downhill slide.
Bill Gallo, has this made your life harder as a reporter?
It's made it more exciting.
Is that right?
It's more exhausting. I mean, there's definitely an aspect of this. You go to work every day and you just don't know what to expect. I mean, anything could happen in those briefings. They really are must-see TV. It's weird knowing that the whole country is watching. And these briefings, they get good ratings on cable television, all three networks. It's like being a part of a circus, a very unpredictable circus in a way.
You've become part of a three-ring circus. But last question, Cindy. To be fair to the president, I mean, how useful really are these press briefings?
Well, and the Bill Clinton aide who first got these televised said that he regretted it. It was one of the worst things he ever done, that the news value actually goes down. So there is some, how useful they are. Most of our stories, we have to dig elsewhere for them, not necessarily from the briefing. So that is true.
So expect more fireworks, right?
Yes.
My thanks to Bill Gallo and Cindy Sain. I wish I had more time with two of you, and of course all of our correspondents today, but that's our time for today. We will be back again next week for another edition of the Correspondents. In the meantime, stay up to date with the latest developments around the world at voanews.com. You can also check out our shows there. Just click on the Watch tab on the upper right. We're also on Facebook and YouTube at VOA The Correspondents. I'm Millar Seaga. Thanks for watching. For now, so long from Washington.